Tea or chai, the most popular drink in the world after water. Since we uploaded the video about coffee, some people commented to make a video about the history of tea. You can find tea in every part of the world, but each culture drinks it their own way. Of course, the most amount of tea consumed is in Asia, because that's where it originated from. Assam in India, Sichuan and Yunnan in China. If we want to talk about how long humans have been drinking tea, we can't, because it's about thousands and thousands of years, kinda like beer. If you've seen our video about beer, it has been more than 13,000 years since humans have been drinking beer, so you really can't put a date on it. But China itself claims that they've been drinking tea for 5,500 years. But the first proof we have about drinking tea is about 2,500 years ago by Buddhists, and they were drinking both in India and China. This shows us that drinking tea was a Buddhist tradition. The tea they were drinking was nothing like today. It was completely different. They would basically dry out the tea leaves, compress them so much that they turn into a brick. And whenever they wanted some tea, they would break a piece of that brick and throw it in hot water and drink. I have never drank this type of tea, but the people that have say it's much more bitter than what we are used to. But you have to know that the ancient Buddhists didn't drink tea for enjoyment. They actually drank it for medicine, and they thought it was very good for you. Drinking tea continues like this until the Tang dynasty takes power in China. This empire remained in China from 618 AD all the way to 907. Drinking chai or tea completely changed when this dynasty took over because different innovations were used to drink this plant. They pretty much turned tea from a medicine that was very bitter into something that tasted great and you could enjoy it. At this time, it was mostly green tea, but they were also drinking black tea back then too. The Tang dynasty had an idea to import this tea to the entire world, and they did just that using the Silk Road that went all the way through Persia and to the Mediterranean, where you can even reach Europe. And this was the first time they went eastwards, so they introduced tea to the Koreans and the Japanese. The Japanese loved tea so much that they had tea ceremonies, which was mostly done by the samurais. In samurai culture, it's very common to drink tea. And it slowly turned into the national drink of Japan, where everybody in Japan was drinking tea. Another interesting fact about tea is that in everywhere in the world, it has two different names. It's either chai in different accents or tea in different accents. Like Arabs say chai, the Russians say zai, the Persians and Indians say chai, English tea, French latte, Italians tè. The Chinese say cha, and this is where the name originated from. But the tea name also originated from China, but in the parts of Fujian. And since it was a place next to the ocean, it allowed this name to go everywhere in the world. And that is why a lot of places, especially Western countries, use the term tea. The term té went all the way to Europe, except to Portugal, because the Portuguese were the first ones to buy tea from the Chinese, and they got familiar with the name cha, and that is why they still call it cha. When you get to the 14th century, tea has been introduced everywhere, obviously except North and South America. The entire continent of Europe is familiar with it, but the Europeans do not like it because they don't know how to properly make it to make it enjoyable. They make it very bitter, so nobody likes it. Let's go to the year 1600. When Elizabeth I is the Queen of England, and they have landed in India for the very first time. They learned what tea is, and they get familiar with the way they drink it. They immediately think of a way to make money off this plant. They try to make the deal with the Indian government, and long story short, they tell them, whatever tea you produce, don't sell it to anyone else. Sell it to us and we'll buy all of it. So the Indians very gladly agreed to the white man. By doing this, the British had so much power in the world because they monopolized the tea that was coming out of India and selling it everywhere else. When this deal was made, a lot of tea would make its way to Europe, especially Britain itself. At this time, everyone in England is drinking coffee, but the government would add advertisement that tea is better for you, it tastes better, and of course, it's much cheaper than coffee now. What they did is they made the poorest British man drink tea all the way to the Queen herself. The British had a monopoly that was very powerful, but it still wasn't the biggest one because the Chinese had an even bigger monopoly. They had much more tea, and with the help of the Silk Road, they would sell much more tea around Asia and all the way to the Mediterranean. You have to know that in this time, China is the most powerful and richest country in the world. The British go to the Chinese and ask them, why do you work so hard? Every ounce of tea you make, sell it to us. The Chinese say, we don't need money, we want some stuff. The British ask, what type of stuff? They say silver. Of course, the British didn't have enough silver to give to the Chinese for the tea, so a deal was not made. The British weren't gonna give up that easily. They pulled out the drawing board and thought of a plan. In the 18th century, the British got familiar with a plant that would give off a substance called opium. Of course, they realized that this is a very addictive substance, and that is why they thought of an idea on how to use opium in China so they can get tea from them. They came up with an idea that we should make the Chinese people addicted to opium so they could accept opium over silver. At this time, the entire subcontinent of India is in British control, especially the Bengal area, which is very important for this story. When the British examined the best place to grow opium, Bengal is the best place. It's the best weather, and it's perfect. There's plenty of population as well. They steal all the land and enslave the entire population to work in poppy fields and produce opium. Over the years, more than 10 million Bengalis were starved to death because of working in these fields in these conditions. With the blood of the Bengali people, thousands of tons of opium are produced, and most of them are sent to China, somewhere that opium is very illegal. But the way they smuggled it, and with the help of it being free, made 1 out of 3 Chinese person be addicted to opium. The British were making a lot of money alongside this. You might say, I thought you were giving it for free to the Chinese. They were, but they were selling opium, which was needed everywhere in the world, for a lot of money. The British were basically trying to paralyze the Chinese government, economy, and people so they can monopolize the tea market in the world and become more powerful than them. So they were making plenty of money off opium around the world. By using Indian slave labor and producing something that the entire world needs, Britain turns to the richest empire in the world for the very first time, passing China. Of course, the Chinese emperor was furious when he realized what the British are doing to his country and his people, and he thought of a game plan. He announced that every ounce of opium that is found has to be taken, and he told his men, every single piece of opium you find, take it to the middle of the sea and dump it in the ocean. In a very short period of time, more than 1.2 million kilograms of opium was dumped into the ocean. When the British realize what is happening, they tell themselves the Chinese are declaring war on us. So the Opium War began. The Qing dynasty was the richest and most powerful dynasty in the world at this time, except before the opium took over the population. Most of the men in the Chinese army were all addicted to opium, and you could say they were paralyzed, they couldn't do anything. And this is while the British army was all young, powerful, and ready to fight. It's amazing, the highest producing opium empire, not one of their soldiers is addicted to opium. Isn't that funny? This is when the British take over Hong Kong and stay there. They realize that it's a very strategic location in this area of the world, and they stay there. The Chinese don't have any power to take the area back, so the war stopped. Either way, the British take over Hong Kong and they stay here for about 50 years. Of course, the Chinese government always asks for Hong Kong back. And then eventually, in the year 1898, the British make a deal with the Chinese dynasty to let us rent out Hong Kong for 99 years. If you agree to this, we will leave after 99 years like it's yours. Since the Chinese didn't have any more power left, they were forced to agree on this deal. One of the reasons that the British Empire turned to the richest and most powerful empire is that they had the Indian subcontinent, and they had an insane population in their hands which they enslaved. With the help of enslaved, they had a lot of tea, and since they had the strongest navy, they very easily took this tea everywhere in the world. It's very interesting because everywhere you look in history, at least in modern history, you see these guys around. What do you guys think?